Dr. Vic Stenger. Thanks for joining us today, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, from reading that bio there, obviously we hear two words in there. We hear philosophy, and we also understand a lot about science coming from you. And I'm wondering, we've heard a lot of physicists, for instance, we have people like Stephen Hawking and even Neil deGrasse Tyson, both of whom we are fans of, but they say things like, well, philosophy is dead. Now, how do you use, then, philosophy and science to argue against things like God and faith? Do you feel that it's helpful to use both?
Yes. Well, actually, I have quite a bit of respect for philosophy. I think more than the current crop of physicists do. They grew up. A lot of them grew up after World War II, when the attitudes about philosophy were a lot less friendly than they were, let's say, with the early 20th century physicists, the great physicists like Einstein and Bohr and Heisenberg, Schrödinger. The whole bunch of them were very deeply involved in philosophy, and it was kind of a reaction against that, I guess, in the last century. But it has a place. I've known any number of philosophers, and I'm amazed at how much more physics they know than I know philosophy. And while I have a position as an adjunct professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado, for which I'm very grateful to have, because it means I can use the university facilities and so on, and I can interact a lot with the philosophy department. I'm still basically a scientist. I come from the science end of things, and not only the science end, but the experimental end rather than the theoretical end. And a lot of the people who write popular books on physics in particular and cosmology are more theoretical than I am. I tend to be more interested in what are the observations, what experiments say, and I have kind of a philosophy of reality, which is all we really can know about is what we observe. And you really, a lot of the arguments you hear, if I could just carry on a little bit longer, a lot of the arguments that you hear from theologians and theists about God, about the existence of God, are logical arguments. And my view of a logical argument that I think is held to by most of the philosophers, certainly the ones I know, is that you really learn nothing from a logical argument that's not already embedded in your premises.
Okay, yeah.
Have some other source of knowledge to put into the process, into the rational process. I mean, logic is very valuable, obviously, but it has to start from someplace, from some premise, and you have to have a basis for that premise other than just assuming it and then seeing what happens from there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's kind of where people like, philosophers like William Lane Craig, for instance, run into a big problem, is that they kind of assert things that we don't know are factual in their premises, and then the whole argument, as far as I'm concerned, just falls apart, where you've debated Craig before, obviously. Yes,
I've done it twice now, and I think I held my own pretty well in both debates, which is pretty good because he's certainly a terrific debater. He knows the techniques very well, and anybody who debates him is going to have a tough time.
Absolutely, I think you're right about that.
I just want to know how you can get around when Craig says something along the lines of, that the universe needed a creator, but he never really seems to give a great answer for the creation of God. He'll say something along the lines like, well, we know that God and again, he's asserting that we do know for a fact that God exists and he exists outside of time and space, and therefore he doesn't need a creator. I mean, how can somebody use that as a logical argument? I personally don't get it.
Well, it's just, obviously, I'd just say to him, how do you know that?
Right.
I mean, you're saying something that's something that's possible, that there is a reality out there that we don't know about, that is beyond space and time and so on. I don't deny the possibility of that. I just argue, first of all, is there any evidence for it? And second of all, what kind of evidence might you expect? And his particular kind of God, which is a very personal God, is a God that I argue we should have had plenty of evidence for by now. And so that's the approach I take to the whole discussion of the existence of God, the existence of a creator, what kind of universe we have, and so on.
Right. I know in your newest book, God and the Folly of Faith, you say something along the lines that if God is a personal God and does intervene in the physical world, then his hand should be dripping with physics, as I believe is the line that you say. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like, what evidence, if God did have a hand in design, should we be looking for, or should be quite evident?
Yeah, well, this was the